The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org and the weekly edition of Global Alert News. The siege of the planet grinds on. Lots of stories to cover today. Too many to probably get through, but I'll do my best. The show is broadcast live on KQMS throughout Northern California Saturday mornings from 6 to 7 a.m. Those who want a recording of the show can find it on the KQMS website or on GeoEngineeringWatch.org under the radio section. No commercials on this show, no sponsors to answer to. The show is paid for out of our own resources so that we can say what needs to be said. Quick note about a film called Vaxxed. V-A-X-X-E-D, film that everyone needs to see, about the vaccinations and the cover-up from the Centers for Disease Control with a whistleblower, high-level whistleblower from that agency. If you think you know the whole truth and you haven't seen this film, you don't know. And my gratitude to those who made this film, but interestingly enough, for those of us that are trying to get this film aired in Reading, we're having great difficulty for reasons we don't yet understand, and we're trying to get to the bottom of that. But with any luck, I'll make more announcements on this later. We will have this film aired, and if you're not afraid of the truth, you should see this film, just like those that aren't afraid of the truth should watch the 9/11 Architects and Engineers for Truth film. You can search this online, 9/11 Architects and Engineers for Truth. Why would anyone who really wants the truth be afraid of what 2,500 of the world's most recognized and renowned architects and engineers have to say about that event? And there's some new news on that event, by the way, from Saudi Arabia and their admission to what they know happened on 9/11, because now they're being blamed, and now the wheels have been put in motion for lawsuits against Saudi Arabia. A lot to this story, and now Saudi Arabia is starting to spill the beans, if you will. More on that later in the show. Again, so much that we face, converging catastrophes from every direction. And during the course of that, I want to give a thought for the day, and then we'll get on to the headlines. And this is from Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. And I feel incredibly fortunate that his writings came into my possession at a very young age. I was 14 years old, and that philosophy, if you will, has been a great anchor for me. And it's very parallel with certain writings and other traditions. For example, many belief systems, if you will. Many parallels, but this is an important thought for the day. Quote from Marcus Aurelius, this is nearly 2,000 years old. Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. Our sense of reason. What a neglected sense in today's modern society. Completely neglected and distracted as the power structure wishes it to be, so that we can't face what we need to face if we're to preserve any sort of future. Consider that thought. Let's move on. The weather, the silvery white skies, especially in the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, continue. There's nothing normal or natural about silvery white skies in the morning. What does that mean? It means the atmosphere is full of particulates. So for those who think there's no aerosol spraying going on because they can't see horizon-to-horizon trails, that's not the case. If your skies are silvery white, if you put something up and you block the sun, and you see a massive halo around the sun, the sky is packed full of particulates. If you don't see a blue sky and the sky's, again, a white haze, and you look toward the horizon and the cumulus clouds that normally float over the mountain ranges are blent into a white background, that's an atmosphere full of particulates, and you're breathing all of them. They're highly toxic. We have the lab tests to prove it, getting very close to legal action in the U.S. to help bring this to light. More announcements on that soon, but we're getting very close. Documents are almost finished for this. Now, La Nina, is apparently going to surface now, or at least that's what the signs point to after El Nino has released much of its ocean heat. But the heat is still building. It's a runaway train at this point. And those who still don't believe that are simply living in a closet. You're not looking at frontline data, period. Planets in meltdown. Climate engineering is making it far worse, not better. Texas slaughtered again by record flooding. This is going to continue because the climate engineers need moisture to create temporary toxic chemically nucleated cool downs, and that's exactly what they're doing. That's why the weather whiplash happens. That's why slightly over a week ago on the east side of Lake Shasta, the temperatures dropped for a short time into the high 30s. And now, in the coming days, we're going to be well over 100. There's nothing normal about this. If you think it's normal, you're living in a delusion. Do some research. Another point on the weather whiplash, it's scheduled to continue. We're heading back into record warmth that's going to return and stay over the western U.S., along with returning and worsening drought. The climate engineers control where it rains and where it doesn't. And this is absolute fact. The data is there to back up what happens when you saturate the atmosphere with particulates. You can diminish or augment precipitation. The data is there to prove what's happening in our skies. Do some research. Again, the scheduled weather for the south and the east is for continuing on and off toxic geoengineered cool downs. They will try to continue to cool down the most populated parts of the country to continue the confusion and the division as to the true state of the climate while the planet descends into meltdown. You don't have a blue patch on the global map of temperature deviations right over the most populated areas of the U.S. for no reason. It's not natural that again and again and again in recent years we have these massive cool downs in between the record heat warm-ups that keep occurring. And the destructive hailstorms will continue to increase also. Again, a result of chemical ice nucleation. And we have the patents for this process, by the way, going back to 1950. Patent even assigned to NASA called chemical nucleation for weather modification. All the data is there. China admitted they're doing this again. The U.S., of course, is not about to admit that, but it's happening. If you wonder why there's massive hail falling everywhere all the time now, normal, doing billions of dollars worth of damage, do some research and find out why. Now, again, a lot of headlines to cover, a lot of converging catastrophes. I know that people get overwhelmed by this, but stick with me and I'll give you something to go on at the end of this show, a philosophy, if you will. And we all have to exercise our philosophy or we can't face this. Philosophy must be exercised like the human body every day. You don't do it once and then say you're good. You don't exercise one time and say I'm fit for life. It doesn't work that way. You have to continue exercising it. You have to exercise your philosophy also in order to face the daily onslaught of human insanity that's not slowing down. How many wake up every morning and wish that just for a short time the insanity might stop? But it won't stop until enough people wake up and decide what matters and what doesn't. And then material pursuits, the personal pleasure pursuits at the expense of the planet and any future for our children must be shelved. That's not a recipe to continuing life on Earth. In fact, that's why we're in the mess we're in. Let me get through some headlines now that are breaking this week. And anyone who chooses to look for these headlines, again, I've never asked anyone to believe me. I'll state this once and I'll continue. Please investigate every single thing I say. So I'll go over headlines. You can investigate any one of these headlines. I encourage you to. Let's start with this. The global monetary system has devalued 47% over the last 10 years. Those who are under the delusion that you can perpetually expand, again, on a finite planet with finite resources, that paradigm's falling apart now. Another headline. Desperate plight of the petrostates, the oil-producing states. With a busted business model, oil economies head for the unknown. Yes, we are in uncharted territory right now. The fossil fuel fiesta, in the words of James Kunstler, is coming to an end now. Another headline. Shipbuilding industry collapses, hits China and South Korea. It's not just going to hit them, though. Global shipping is screeching to a halt now. These headlines might sound familiar to some because the situation continues to worsen week by week. But these are all new headlines. Again, any of them can be researched. Another headline. Idle tankers, something stunning is taking place off the coast of Singapore. One has to see this map to truly believe it. It looks like a massive tanker traffic jam of tankers that are storing oil because the cost is so low that everybody is now selling at a massive net loss, and they're trying to store some of this oil in tankers off the coast. And the same is true with shipping vessels that are now sitting idle in so many places because humanity has overshot its attempt to industrialize the planet, which could have never worked or been sustained. And now we're seeing the backup of that with idle ships anchored in so many places around the globe. Another headline, U.S. government's own report shows toxic TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, not worth passing. Now, these trade agreements, while the population goes about its own distractions, iPhones, movies, cruises, whatever else the population does, those in power are very, very busy tightening the noose around our collective necks. And that's not going to stop until enough people show some responsibility and start engaging in the fight for the common good. And I'm sorry to say I know so many people who are simply sitting the bench, who know what's going on, or at least know enough to know they should be involved in the battle. And I hope that changes. I truly hope that changes. And that comes back to a philosophy again. What matters most? Going to a movie or a soccer game or whatever other distraction you can come up with, or solidly engaging in the fight for the common good, helping to sound the alarm, helping to bring truth and reality to light? That question really doesn't need an answer, does it? If you need to think about that answer, then you're already on the wrong track. If the answer is not very apparent and very immediate. Another headline, IBM continues layoffs that could top 14,000 job cuts. Don't see much of that in the headlines, do we? No. All we see is that the job rate is wonderful because so many people have fallen off the back of the conveyor and no longer count that they can fake and falsify the figures downward. If you think the economy is getting better, you're living in a corporate media, carefully crafted lie. Wake up from that lie. Another headline, Shell to cut another 2,200 jobs. The carnage will keep coming as the industrial machine screeches to a halt. Another headline, Microsoft cutting 1,850 jobs related to mobile phone sector. Just the beginning. Headlines again that we don't see. Another headline, Intel to slash up to 350 jobs in Germany. All across the board, the slashes, the cuts are coming. One more, Nokia sheds over 1,000 jobs in Finland. It's just the beginning. And those who think that they'll see the warning signs decades away, this is not how things will unfold. As links in the chain start to drop out, the incredibly delicately balanced and incredibly complex industrialized society that we've all known will disintegrate very rapidly. And the faster we face that, the faster we try to change directions, the more we may have yet to salvage. That simple. Another headline, oil and banking job losses leave many hunting for work. Manufacturing recession goes global as demand withers. Yet one more headline of the juggernaut of industrialized, militarized insanity starting to screech to a halt. And this makes the power structure much more dangerous as they become much more desperate. And we see this again happening with the maneuvering of chess pieces, most specifically by Western powers, most specifically by the U.S., that is putting their military hardware on the borders of the countries that it perceives as the greatest threat. And we're on their borders, by the way. They're not on ours. We're on theirs. Who's provoking who? And I'm not pro-China. I'm not pro-Russia. But they are not the ones provoking probable global conflict at this point. It's the United States of America, whose ships are engaging in military exercises on the borders of these countries. And as I've said over and over and over, would the U.S. tolerate that? Would they tolerate Iran and Russia and China engaging in war games on our borders and just off our coasts? The U.S. would never tolerate that. So enough of the hypocrisy for those who wave their flags and have no clue what that means. No clue. No clue what their country, their completely out of control military-industrial complex is doing in their name. Another headline. Hedge funds are betting record amounts on meltdown of Australian banks and housing bubble. All a card house. A massive card house. The whole modern paradigm is a massive card house built on resources that it took the planet tens of millions of years to store. And those resources have been plundered in the geologic blink of an eye. It won't continue, period. Another headline, Exxon Nigeria terminal under siege, exports in question. As populations become desperate, and certainly Nigeria has been completely looted, pillaged, and plundered by the fossil fuel military-industrial complex, and they're all the same, by the way. So these populations are desperate now. They're absolutely desperate. This is why you have the pirating going on in certain areas too, because these people's fishing industries have been completely wiped out due to oil spills and toxic pollution and so forth. They have nothing left. I'm not advocating the piracy in any sense, but I'm saying that look at the bigger picture. And by the way, in all these countries, a quote from Trump, which I'll highlight again later, where Mr. Trump has recently, I saw him say this, tried to make the case that countries around the world are taking advantage of the United States. Really? But that's exactly wrong. And the data is everywhere to back that up. I'll have more on that as I get further into the show. Another headline, we're in the eye of a global financial hurricane. Excerpt from that headline, the only, quote, growth we're experiencing are the financial cancers of a systemic risk and financialization's soaring wealth income inequality. It's not a storm that will pass. This is the final death throes of a system that is built on greed and plunder. And that system can't last. It can't last. And I'm not advocating any system of government at all. They're all flawed because we have too many people in our species that are not concerned about the greater good. They're simply concerned about what they perceive to be their own personal good. But that's a very blind notion, isn't it? The Stoics would say that, quote, no mind is willingly deprived of the truth. What does that mean? It means that even those who think that their pursuit of power and material wealth is for their own good are deceived, because ultimately that will lead to their own demise. And that's what that Stoic statement means. No mind is willingly deprived of the truth. People who think like that, who think like our leaders, that crave power and can't have enough and think somehow it's for their own good, they are, in the deepest of senses, deceived. Another headline, NATO plans more anti-Russian moves after finalizing latest military buildup. That's a headline. Again, putting missile installations on the Russian borders. How is Russia supposed to act? How do we expect them to act? When the taunt that we had was based on neither power provoking the other. That's no longer the case. NATO's goal is as a puppet for the U.S. and the Western power structures to expand empire and hegemony, period. A few more headlines. China demands end to U.S. surveillance after aircraft intercept. One more example of what I'm stating. Would we tolerate Chinese surveillance aircraft flying over our airspace? Absolutely not. Why does the U.S. population not only ignore what our country's doing, but support it? They support whatever the military does because of the completely spun propaganda that's pumped out on our corporate media day after day after day by MSNBC, Fox, CNN, and then the more ridiculous channels like Fox News, Glenn Beck, and then we have the far left channels like, again, Democracy Now! That I've mentioned earlier as well. None of these sources putting out the truth. None of them. All of them bought, sold, and paid for by those in power. A few more headlines. City sets new Indian heat record of 51 degrees C. This is in India. 51 C is about 124 degrees Fahrenheit. The planet is in total meltdown. One of the deadliest heat waves ever, by the way, continuing in India. We're going to see immense heat in many locations around the globe. We already are. And look at your thermometer and compare that to the, quote, official temperature reading for the day. Compare that. Because what we typically see everywhere we monitor is a 4 to 5 degree under-reporting of the official high temperatures. That means it's much, much hotter than even what we're being told. We are much further into the curve than we're being told. And when we look at the quote-unquote average highs, consider that that's from a bracket in time that already was 2 degrees warmer than the baseline from 1850 before the start of the Industrial Revolution. So we're comparing the quote normal temperatures from a bracket of time that is already not normal. That's already warmer than what it should be. In every possible manner, the power structure and all the agencies and entities it controls, which includes National Weather Service, which includes NOAA, again, both of those organizations under federal gag orders right now, those in power control the information. And the population is all too willing to be deceived so far. That's what they want to hear. And until they want the truth, we have no chance of turning direction. Population must want to wake up. Another headline. 2016 to be the hottest year ever, scientists say. It's exactly how it's going to happen. That beats 2014, which was beaten by 2015, which will be beaten by 2016. Again, we just passed. April was the 12th consecutive month of record-shattering months in a row. The planet's in meltdown, and if you're in the engineered cool down east and you don't think it's true because it's cold outside your door in between the whiplash of heat events, then you're just living in a bubble, period. Look at the bigger picture. From this report, on the heels of 2 record-setting years for global heat, 2016 is likely to set a new high for the planet in modern times, U.S. scientists said Thursday. Continuing from that report, experts revealed their predictions a day after the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced that a new global heat record had been set in April for the 12th consecutive month, which I just stated. Another headline, Canadian wildfires to spread to Saskatchewan, 1.2 million acres burned. Now, for those that haven't heard, anyone desiring to go into the Fort McMurray area that's been fried to a crisp is being required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Why is that? What are they hiding? What are they hiding in Canada? And consider that the single greatest causal factor to the radically increasing fires around the globe is climate engineering. And I hear from people who don't want to know the truth, who say this: the fires are all the fault of the environmentalists for not allowing the forest to be cleared, cleaned, and logged. That's an absolute ridiculous lie. Logging is not good for the forest. There's no secret about that. And I know a lot about that. Again, my father was an arborist. I spent many years in habitat restoration. I live in the forest. I've restored lands that have been previously logged. Logging is not good for the forest. Understory thinning can be, but again, you typically have the understory brush problems where forests have been logged, the overstory has been taken off, and now the balance that was there has been lost. It all goes back to man's intervention. And nowhere is that damage more cataclysmic than man's intervention with the climate, which again is the single greatest causal factor with the protracted droughts and the radically increasing forest fires. Why? Because climate engineering disrupts the hydrological cycle, the rain cycle. The rain that falls is toxic heavy metals. We know this. We have lab tests from around the globe to prove it. These bioavailable metals are hugely harmful to the root systems. They cause massive fungal proliferation, which is killing trees as well. They shred the ozone layer, so we have unimaginably intense UV radiation frying everything. Easy to feel this on your skin. climate engineering, single greatest assault on the planet, but not the only assault. Again, industrialized civilization is a total cataclysm for the planet all the way around. I'm simply focusing on climate engineering as the epitome of that insanity. Another headline, fate of primal forest imbalance as Poland plans logging. Countries are so desperate they're stripping the last remaining bit of their natural resources. Happening in Ukraine also, by the way. The Ukraine that was toppled by actions from our government, and now the resources being plundered there. Again, I want to remind everybody, Joe Biden's son immediately put on the board of oil executives there to help determine the fate of their hydrocarbon resources. Not hard to see this stuff. Not hard to see through it, not hard to connect the dots if you simply try. Now, back to the fungus relating to geoengineering as well. Another headline, deadly crop-killing fungus reaches Asia. Of the species extinction rate today, which is 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect per day, up to 70 to 80% is fungally related. Why? Because these toxic materials kill beneficial microorganisms from the clouds to the ground. What happens when you kill the beneficial microorganisms? Fungus proliferates. Same thing happens in the human body after you take antibiotics. Again, one more road of destruction leading right back to climate engineering. Another headline, Panama disease threatens all bananas. Fungus again. It's waving through the ecosystem right now. This complete backlash of destruction from man's interference with Earth's life support systems. Climate engineering, the epitome of that interference, but not the only part. Again, another headline. Do seed companies control GM crop research? Excerpt from that headline. Scientists must ask corporations for permission before publishing independent research on genetically modified crops. That restriction must end. All of academia is being controlled by those who control the purse strings. Why would that be a surprise to anyone? So when you see an article that claims genetically modified foods are safe, you're seeing a complete lie put out by those who control the purse strings and thus who control the flow of information. We're living in the Orwellian world where black is white, up is down, and day is night. Wake up and see through the smoke and mirrors. Another headline, genetically modified salmon approved for sale as food in Canada. Those who think the government of Canada is somehow more environmentally oriented couldn't be further from the truth. These people are joined at the hip with the military-industrial corporate complex in the US of A. All of these organizations are just a global cabal of power, period, and they're doing whatever they want. Do you want to eat a salmon that's been genetically modified to grow 3 times faster than a natural salmon does? And do you know, and please investigate what I'm saying, that farm-raised salmon and farm-raised fish in general is considered one of the most toxic foods you can eat? Look it up. Another headline, hundreds of millions to be displaced by climate change, French minister warns. Now, it's not just hundreds of millions. It's even larger than that, and it's happening now. It's already happening now. It's not off on the horizon. And why don't we hear about this? And people think that if their corporate media propaganda machine is not telling them, it must not be true. Not going to be able to hide in that bubble much longer. Why don't we know? Reasons like this. Another headline, UN omits mention of Australia in new climate report. Now think about that one. We know that the majority of the Great Barrier Reef, one of the 7 wonders of the world, greatest living organism on the planet, just died in the geologic blink of an eye. And it's not just the reef now. The mangrove forests are also dying just as fast. That coastline is under great threat. And you can't change this. You can't turn it off. And yet, with all this climate destruction happening in Australia, the UN omits mention of Australia in new climate report. The entire flow of information is being completely manipulated at this point to keep populations, most specifically the U.S. population, that has the greatest potential to help turn the tide if they would just wake up. But the effort that's being put out right now by those in power to make sure the U.S. population doesn't wake up is immense. It's absolutely immense. And what happens if a member of the population decides to speak out against the country that is doing, or the government of the country that's doing so much wrong right now? What happens? What do the free speech loving, democracy loving Americans, how do they respond to this? And here's an exceptional example of that. Here's a headline. Employee wearing a, quote, "America was never great" hat receives death threats. Now, wouldn't a truly great country allow that person to have their opinion? No, that's not the case. From this report, Crystal Lake was tired of the slogan, "Make America Great Again," quote. So the 22-year-old Bernie Sanders supporter, and I'm not a supporter of Bernie Sanders, I want to say that on the record, or any of the rest of them, by the way. The 22-year-old supporter of Bernie Sanders decided to make her own merchandise parodying the phrase popularized by presumptive GOP presidential candidate Donald Trump. She said that Trump's slogan did not make room for bigger aspirations beyond the past, and that he was dismissive of groups that did not fit his ideal demographic. The New York Times reports. This is from the New York Times. She used an online design site to customize a hat with the slogan, "America was never great," and she wore it to her job at Home Depot the day after it arrived. Continuing from the report, for a few days nothing out of the ordinary occurred, but then social media bullying began, Lake says, and told the Times. Quote, "I was bombarded with negative comments, including death threats on social media," continues. Another quote from this report, "They were actually threatening to kill me over a hat," she said on Thursday. "I couldn't believe it. I was calling my best friend and I was saying, 'How is this happening? It's just a hat.'" Ms. Lake said she did not take the death threats seriously, attributing them to internet trolls. Now, perhaps that's true or not, but what kind of country that considers free speech, democracy to be a right is then so against someone making their opinion known? And when we look back at our past, and so many people are so incredibly well trained to be so completely blind about the true history in America. And if we're not afraid of the truth, we should look at this. How did we get where we got? How do we make the American dream? And there's a film, by the way, called Earth and the American Dream. I would encourage anybody to search online, get a copy of it, and watch. Earth and the American Dream. What is the price the planet has paid for the, quote, American dream? And if everyone were to live like Americans, we would need at least 4 planets. At least. So how is that okay? How is it okay to party for a very short time on planet Earth with massive material consumption at the expense of no future for our children? Why is that okay? It's not okay. Why is it okay that slavery was practiced? And I'm not saying that this should be a pillar for those who continue to, for example, in some riots around certain places in the country where people are doing damage or vandalizing things because they're angry about our country's future with slavery. That's not right either. It's not right. It's time to move on. But, why do we forget that? Why do we forget the people we worship, like, for example, George Washington, who had slaves and whom the Indians called the burner of villages? They had a name for Washington because he destroyed some 23 Native American villages. Why is that overlooked? Why are we so selective with the truth? Because we're afraid of it? And it's that selective mindset that weeds out unpleasant truths that has caused us to be in the place we're in now. There's only the whole truth. A boat doesn't float if it's mostly watertight or partly watertight. Used that example before, but it's descriptive. Now, why can't we get at the truth? We have a person trying to state that they're not so thrilled with whatever making America great means again. Well, what does that mean? That we can all drive new cars? What does that mean? We can all have our own McMansions? What does it mean to be great? Is it a character virtue? Or is it how many material possessions we have? Or how big the military is? Or how many countries they can crush? What does it mean to be great? Ask yourself that question. And again, back to the truth. Why can't we get at the truth? Here's a headline. Edward Snowden, quote, new Pentagon source shows need for whistleblower shield. From this report, Edward Snowden has called for a complete overhaul of U.S. whistleblower protections after a news source from deep inside the Pentagon came forward with a startling account of how the system became a, quote, trap for those seeking to expose wrongdoing. The account of John Crane, a former senior Pentagon investigator, appears to undermine Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and other major establishment figures who argue that there were established routes for Snowden other than leaking to the media. There was no other route. Listen to why that's the case. Crane, a longtime assistant inspector general at the Pentagon, has accused his old office of retaliating against a major surveillance whistleblower, Thomas Drake, in an episode that helps explain Snowden's 2013 National Security Agency disclosure. Not only did Pentagon officials provide Drake's name to criminal investigators, Crane told The Guardian they destroyed documents relative to his defense. This is what our system does to anyone who tries to tell the truth. Our government is nothing more than a criminal cabal, and it can be in that position because there are so many order followers who don't give a damn about morality or honor. They simply do what they're told because that's what pays them. Continuing from the report, Snowden, responding to Crane's revelations, said he had tried to raise his concerns with colleagues, supervisors, and lawyers, and had been told by all of them, quote, "You're playing with fire." In other words, don't question the cancer. Always go along with the cancer. That's how off the rails our system is. Continuing from the report, financially ruined. Thomas Drake's legal ordeal for trying to bring truth to light again ruined him financially and ended in 2011 with all serious accusations against him dropped. Those in power, once they ruin you, they can walk away, even though there was no legitimate charges to begin with. How can our country, let's give Guantanamo as an example. How can our country claim to be a beacon of freedom of democracy when we have so many people locked up with charges never having been filed against them ever? Torturing people whom have never had charges even brought against them. How many people in our country turn two blind eyes to this? How many people in quote-unquote spiritual institutions who turn two blind eyes to this? How deep can the hypocrisy go? How deep? Continuing from the report, his case, meaning Drake's case, the Pentagon employee, as a prologue to Snowden's, now Crane's account has led to a new investigation at the U.S. Justice Department into which whistleblower retaliation at the Pentagon that may serve as an epilogue. One Crane hopes will make the Pentagon a safe place for insiders to express wrongdoing and illegality. Quote, if we have situations where we have a whistleblower investigated because they're whistleblowers to the general office, that will simply shut down the whole whistleblower system, Crane told The Guardian. Crane, who has not previously given interviews, has told his explosive story in a new book, Bravehearts, Whistleblowing in the Age of Snowden, by Mark Hertsgaard, from which The Guardian is running extracts. The Guardian has partnered with Der Spiegel and Newsweek Japan on Crane's story. Quote, when someone becomes a whistleblower, they're making a serious, conscious decision, Crane said. He continues with this quote, they're making a decision that can change their lives, change their futures, impact family life too. There needs to be a certain unbreakable trust, confidentiality that trust and can never be violated. But this doesn't exist. Whistleblowers know that their lives will be completely ruined or worse if they tell the truth within our government. The Obama administration has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all other administrations combined. And people wonder, why isn't someone speaking out? Why do you think? Continuing from the report, Snowden cited Drake's case as a reason for his lack of faith in his government's official whistleblower channels. He continues with this quote, when I was at NSA, everybody knew that for anything more serious than a workplace harassment, going through the official process was a career ender at best. It's part of the culture, Snowden told The Guardian. Snowden continued, if your boss in the main mailroom lies on his timesheets, the IG, the investigating department, might look into it. But if you're Thomas Drake and you find out the President of the United States ordered the warrantless wiretapping of everyone in the country, what's the IG going to do? They're going to flush it, and you with it. While Drake's case is well known in the U.S. national security circles, the international history is not. Final paragraph from this report. Forced out. Crane's relationship with his superiors spiraled downward until they forced him out in 2013, months before Snowden's revelations. The next year, he filed a complaint with a federal agency that works with whistleblowers, the Office of Special Counsel. In March this year, it found a, quote, substantial likelihood that the Pentagon Inspector General's office improperly destroyed the Drake documents and arranged with the Pentagon consent for the Justice Department Inspector General to investigate. In other words, if you tell the truth, you will be completely ruined. Your job, your life, your finances, perhaps even worse. What about reporter Gary Webb, who tried to bring to light the fact that the U.S. was directly involved with drug trafficking? His life was completely ruined before it appears that he was killed. And that's what happens to truth tellers in our society. And the vast majority of the citizens choose to look the other way and entertain themselves and not give the whistleblowers and the truth tellers the support that they deserve. That's how things get as bad as they are today. Another headline, and I want to weave this into the bigger picture, so follow me through with this. Here's a headline from last week. U.S. holds the world record of killings of innocent civilians. World-renowned Canadian philosopher argues that the United States holds the world record of illegal killings of unnamed civilians and extrajudicial detention and torturing of prisoners who are detained without trial. Now, with this headline, it's important to consider history, that we have massive examples of governments killing their own that certainly exceed this. By some estimates, the Russian government killed as many as 36,000 of their own military and civilian population. Unimaginable atrocities in other countries. But unfortunately, the U.S. is in that category to a large degree, and increasingly so. And you have to look at the results of the U.S. actions that lead to such massive carnage. And let me try to point out some of the processes by which so many people are killed. Let me go to another headline to elaborate on that. London fuels brutal war with Yemen by supplying Saudi Arabia with cluster bombs. Who sells the most weapons to Saudi Arabia? The United States of America. And what happens with those weapons? Who do they kill? And is not the person who supplied the weapon also responsible? That's the case here with criminal law. If you illegally supply someone a weapon and they kill someone with that weapon, you're liable. Why is that not the case on the bigger picture? Why is the United States supplying Saudi Arabia with unimaginable amounts of weapons with which they are killing innocent people? And as I've stated before, this year alone we had some 40 political dissenters that were beheaded and hung from cranes in Saudi Arabia, and we never hear about it. For obvious reasons, because they are joined at the hip with the United States because of their fossil fuel reserves. So here we have, again, the U.S. and Britain supplying Saudi Arabia with weapons and cluster bombs that they are using to slaughter innocent civilians in Yemen. We never hear about Yemen. We never hear about Bahrain because the U.S. Navy fleet is there. And so we don't hear about the oppression in brutal dictatorships like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia because they're allies of the United States, because they do the bidding of the United States. And that's the brutal, gross hypocrisy that our country and our media completely omits. Now, from this report, on Monday, prominent rights advocacy group Amnesty International published evidences revealing the fact that Saudi Arabia had used UK and US manufactured weapons in Yemen against rebel groups. Now, this is across the board again. Who supplied Saddam Hussein with his weapons? Who supplied Saddam Hussein with the chemical weapons he used to slaughter innocent civilians? The United States of America. Learn your history. Understand what's happening. Now, let's carry this further. The carnage caused by direct actions of the U.S. government, and now we're heading back into 9/11. How many deaths have been caused as a direct result of 9/11? How many countries invaded and toppled because of what happened on 9/11? So ultimately the question is, who actually did 9/11? And are some of the alliances, like the Saudi Arabian and U.S. alliance, now finally breaking down as the power structures become ever more desperate to play the cards they have? Let's look at that scenario. Here's an article from a Saudi Arabian publication this last week. Quote, U.S. planned carried out 9/11 attacks, but blames others for them. From this report, after President Obama's April 2016 visit to Saudi Arabia, the U.S. Congress began debating the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, JASTA, that would enter and allow the families of the victims of the September 11th attacks to sue the Saudi government for damages. Also, in April 2016, the New York Times published that a 2002 congressional inquiry into the 9/11 attacks had found that the Saudi officials living in the United States at the time had a hand in the plot. The commissions, and again, we sell weapons to Saudi Arabia still today. We flew 93 Saudis back right after 9/11 when no one else was allowed to fly, no questions asked, no interviews, no interrogations. Continuing from this report, the Commission's conclusions said in the paper were specified in a report that has not been released publicly. The JASTA bill, which was passed by the Senate on May 17, 2016, triggered fury in Saudi Arabia, expressed in statements by the Saudi foreign minister and the scathing attacks on the U.S. in the Saudi press. On April 28, 2016, the London-based Saudi daily Al Hayat published an exceptionally harsh article on this topic by Saudi legal expert, hard to pronounce that name, Shamari, first name I won't pronounce, who argued that the U.S. itself had planned and carried out the 9/11 attacks while placing the blame on a shifting series of others, first Al-Qaeda, then the Taliban, then Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq, and now Saudi Arabia. He wrote that the American threats to reveal documents that supposedly point to Saudi involvement in 9/11 are part of a standard U.S. policy of exposing archival documents to use as leverage against various countries, which he calls victory by means of archives. Following excerpts are from Shamari's article. Quote, those who follow American policy see that it is built upon a principle of advanced planning and future probabilities. This is because it occasionally presents a certain topic to a country that it does not wish to bring up at the time, but that it is reserving in its archives as an ace to play at a later date in order to pressure that country. Anyone revisiting the statements by George W. Bush regarding Operation Desert Storm might find that he acknowledged that the U.S. Army could have invaded Iraq in the 90s, but that the Americans had preferred to keep Saddam Hussein around as a bargaining chip for use against the other Gulf states. However, once the Shiite wave began to advance, the Americans wanted to get rid of Saddam since they no longer saw him as an ace up their sleeve. Now again, this is from Saudi legal expert article published in Saudi Arabian papers in the last week. Final statement from this report. September 11th is one of the winning cards in the American archives because all the wise people in the world who are experts on American policy and who analyze the images on the videos of 9/11 agree unanimously that what happened in the Twin Towers was purely American action, planned and carried out within the U.S. Proof of this is the sequence of continuous explosions that dramatically ripped through both buildings. Expert structural engineers demolished them with explosives, while the planes crashing into them only gave the green light for the detonation. They were not the reason for the collapse, but the U.S. still spreads the blame in all directions. Now, this is from Saudi Arabian papers. Word is getting out. Now, two more points from this report. From this legal expert in Saudi Arabia, the U.S. created in public opinion an obscure enemy, terrorism. How often do we hear that word used against us as a reason to strip us of our rights? 2, utilizing this incident of 9/11, the U.S. launched a new age of global armament. I just went over that earlier, arming even places like Saudi Arabia and others who are killing innocent civilians. Back to how many civilians is the U.S. and the U.S. military and industrial complex and the U.S. arms manufacturing machine killing, directly or indirectly? 3, the U.S. made the American people choose from two bad options: either live peacefully but remain exposed to the danger of death by, quote, terrorism at any moment, or starve in safety because the country's budget will be spent on a massive military machine. That's the choices we were given. Now, Final point of this report. The nature of the U.S. is that it cannot exist without an enemy. How true is that? The military-industrial complex that runs the world needs to have a reason to continue arming everybody everywhere, expanding nuclear programs. By the way, our nuclear program is being updated, modernized, and expanded to the tune of $1 trillion on a dying planet. How much sanity is there in that, I ask? Now, back to 9/11, back to Al-Qaeda. Let's consider this. In this last week, quote, headline, Syrian Al-Qaeda-linked leader freely visited the U.S. How about that? From the headline, a Syrian militant group chief shielded from the UN terror list by the anti-Al-Qaeda reporting had no trouble entering Washington on a European passport. Al-Qaeda leader visits U.S., no troubles, no questions asked. How about that? And one more headline to tie with that, to tie with 9/11, who really did 9/11, and our alliance with Al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia. Final headline, exclusive, Hezbollah captures CIA officer in Aleppo commanding Al-Qaeda. CIA officer commanding Al-Qaeda. People need to wake up. They need to absolutely wake up because we don't have much time. Now, to summarize again, the U.S. is supplying weapons to completely tyrannical dictatorships that are killing innocent civilians around the globe. All of this, much of this anyway, was a result of the 9/11 scenario that appears to lead right back to elements in our own government. So when we have people like Trump stating that other countries are taking advantage of us, when all available information indicates our own government caused a false flag in our own country to justify and give a license for invading other countries and killing innocent civilians, how many Americans consider this? How many Americans consider the detainees in Guantanamo without charges against them being held and tortured as a result of 9/11, which all available indications show that our government was the core part of, or elements in our government? Look at the facts. If you're not afraid of the truth, look at the facts. And we also have candidates like Trump again. While the planet's in total meltdown, the biosphere is imploding, and our own government is engaged in climate engineering that's further destroying the planet, worsening an already bad climate situation, we have Trump stating that he will roll back and eliminate all the environmental policies related to the disintegrating planet. Is Trump really the answer to our problems? Or Clinton? Or Sanders? These are all just actors in a play. It's time we realize that. Now, as the converging catastrophes encircle us all, many people can become overwhelmed. I want to give a quote from C.S. Lewis to address that fact. Here's the quote. Hardship often prepares an ordinary person for an extraordinary destiny. Don't be overwhelmed by what's happening, but use that to strengthen you. As the proverb goes, what doesn't kill you only makes you strong. Stand fast. Face the unfolding storm with focus. Don't be overwhelmed. And I want to ask this. How many are preparing for collapse? From those at the top who have long since been preparing with deep underground military bases, the DUMBs, as they're called, the acronym, to the common preppers. And yet none of these groups are doing anything to change the course that will lead to mathematically certain global extinction if we stay on that course. Now, no degree of preparation will matter on a planet that doesn't support life. How simple is that? We are the Easter Island scenario unfolding. Easter Island, for those that aren't familiar with it, look it up. A population that consumed all its resources and then consumed itself and collapsed. That's exactly where we're headed. The vast majority of the human race is not yet ready to make the survival of the planet and life on Earth the top priority. And so many are even now completely caught up in the pursuit of material gain and personal pleasure. I want to end this program with a 2,000-year-old statement from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus. This is very important to consider, a very important rule to live by. Happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within our control and other things are not. It is only after you have faced up to this fundamental rule and learned to distinguish between what you can and can't control that inner tranquility and outer effectiveness become possible. We have no choice but to accept what we cannot change, but we have an obligation to change that which we can affect. Make your voice heard. Join us in the battle for the greater good. Make every day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.